The Rams re-signed this receiver at a bargain price, and will Tutu Atwell have a future for the Rams? That's coming up next here on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay. What is up, Ramley? Welcome to the episode of Locked On Rams, your daily podcast covering your Los Angeles Rams. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're also available over on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor and subscribe to Locked On Rams YouTube channel, getting close to 12,000 subscribers, and you got a big off-season. You won't want to miss a thing. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And as always, I'm joined by the Rams pre-half and post-game show host for the Rams flagship radio station, ESPN 710 LA. He just finished his 8th season covering your Los Angeles Rams. The People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him on the X at Travis Rogers. And on today's show, the Rams make a signing. They bring back Demarcus Robinson. We're going to break that all down. We're going to take a look at the 2024 receiver room. Will they go out and draft a guy? Are they done? We're going to talk about that. But first, this episode of Locked On Rams is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, Travis, we've got our first big domino that's fallen this offseason. That is that the Rams have re-signed wide receiver Demarcus Robinson. It's a one-year deal worth up to $5 million. To me, that is a bargain price for a productive wide receiver that fits a very specific role for this team. I like the signing.
I do too. I think this is really interesting. I think this is very good news for the Rams that they did this quickly, that Demarcus Robinson wanted to be there as well. I think is really encouraging because that team had a very different look when he got into that starting lineup. When he was with them through, what would we call it, DMAC, the last quarter of the season or so where he was playing regularly, they were much different offensively. That it helped Cooper Kupp, it helped Puka Nacua, it helped Kyren Williams. That this is a guy that made some big catches for this team along the way. It was a little bit of found money. I think that if you were probably going back to the beginning of last season coming out of camp, he was probably the last guy to make the team. He was probably literally the very last guy to make the roster out of camp, and he didn't play much through the first part of the season. He didn't play much through the middle part of the season, but finally when he got an opportunity to go, he was a difference-making player, and I absolutely love where they are right now in their wide receiver room, and Demarcus Robinson's a big reason why.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. That you look at his numbers, like, okay, 26 catches, 371 yards, 4 touchdowns in 16 games. You're like, okay, what's the big deal, right? But like you point out, he didn't really get it going until later on in the season. He didn't make his first start until week 15 against the Commanders. You started to see a couple weeks before that, really kind of the breakout-ish game was against the Browns. 5 targets, 4 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. And then you started to see him, okay, maybe he's going to supplant Tutu Atwell as the Rams wide receiver 3. And that's exactly what happened. He started to get more targets. And I think for me, he's someone that catches the ball in tough situations. He's big, he's physical, very good red zone threat. He's clutch. Matthew Stafford likes him, which I think is, of course, a massive boost. And it's just a big time re-sign that I think that, look, it's not going to break the bank. And I think that's the biggest thing too, because you can go out there, you can possibly draft a wide receiver, and you got your wide receiver room, we're just going to talk about a little bit, pretty much set at this point. But I think Demarcus Robinson coming back on this deal really feels like a sign that's really for 2024.
Yeah, look, and like you said, for the third wide receiver, this is the right guy. You know, you're not going to get a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson as your third wide receiver. You're going to have a guy that's going to have, fewer catches, that's going to get fewer targets. But when you need him, he needs to be able to step in. I know I say this a lot. The everydayers probably know where I'm headed here. That the Rams, when they've had 3 different 3-headed monsters, and this is when that offense has always been its most effective. We saw the first version, which was Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, and Cooper Kupp, and you never really knew where the ball was going to go. And then the next version of it was Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Odell Beckham, and it never really came together because we saw, Robert Woods get hurt right away. And now we have another three-headed monster with Nakua, with Kupp, and now with Demarcus Robinson. Not that they're going to spread those catches around evenly. That's not going to be what it is. But rather, if you do take away Puka on any given game or any given play, same thing goes for Cooper Kupp. Now what do you do? Well, now you still have another quality NFL wide receiver. Is he going to make a Pro Bowl? No. Is he going to catch some big balls for this team? Absolutely. And that's what we're talking about from that position.
For sure. And that's exactly what this team is looking for a guy like that. He's also a veteran. He's a leader.
Yeah.
He can help Puka Nacua, help take him to the next level. But he's a very calming presence, right? I mean, he's someone that is not trying to figure it out in this league as far as what he can do. He knows what he can do, right? He's past where Tutu Atwell is, right? He knows his strengths. He knows his weaknesses. And play a little game here as far as what he could do. And I know that this is not something that you can just take as fact, but if he did start every single game, and you look at the numbers that he did start, I mean, the numbers would be pretty off the charts. I mean, if he started all 16 games, of course, you got more than that now, but if he started 16 games next season with the numbers that he put up, you're looking at a guy who could have over 100 catches and close to 1,500 yards and 16 touchdowns. Is that going to happen? No, right? But it lets you know that in the small sample size, when he had an increased role, what he's capable of.
And I like the idea, too, of him getting that full rep, right? That full use of the season and being able to increase his numbers is one thing. But just understanding what it is that they're trying to get done in a Sean McVay offense, I think, is a big part of this as well, that he was much better at the end than he was at the beginning. So give him an entire offseason, give him a starting role, give him an opportunity to come into a camp and not just be fighting for a team, but be fighting for an opportunity to get balls thrown his way, to get an opportunity to be fighting for, catches and not just, hey, am I going to make a team? Am I going to have a job coming up to this season? And the fact that the Rams wanted him as badly as they did, that they moved as quickly as they did to re-sign him, I think that's great news for everybody. I think this is a very, very positive development.
And he does have some incentives in there. If he plays 50% of the snaps, will make an extra $500K. If the Rams improve their offensive ranking, they were 7th last year, so it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. But if they improve that and he plays at least 60% of the snaps, he'll earn even more. But even with the incentives, it's still a bargain price. And you know who else thinks he should get more money? That's Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill tweet out, "My boy D-Rob been like that. Stop playing with him. He deserves more." So, hey, man, Tyreek Hill thinks it's a good deal, right?
Tyreek Hill's on board. I'm on board. The Rams are on board. Demarcus Robinson is on board. And again, you mentioned it, a veteran guy. It's a guy that's played in the Super Bowl. This is a guy that has played in big games. And I know that the Rams were in the Super Bowl just a couple of years ago, but the list of guys that were on that team, I mean, what are we talking about? You're talking about a couple of offensive linemen, Stafford, Kupp, Aaron Donald, Ernest Jones, but there really aren't a ton of guys with a long list of postseason experience. Having some guys like Robinson on the roster, I think, is very useful.
No doubt about it. Yeah, not to mention playing in 2 Super Bowls, but winning 1. He's entering his 9th season. Look, this is exactly what the Rams need out of their third wide receiver, a guy who can expose zone coverage, a guy who can beat his man on the man-to-man, a DB who can just get a touchdown in the red zone. It's exactly what I think this wide receiver room needs, and they brought him back. So I think it's also, too, something we're going to see this offseason. The continuity thing is real. They saw the success they had last year, and these guys that worked out, they're taking long, hard looks at bringing them back and finding out what it's going to take to bring them back financially. And we already saw the first domino here with Demarcus Robinson. But coming up next here on Locked On Rams, how does this wide receiver room look right now? Are the Rams done with their wide receiver room? Could they go out there and draft someone? That's coming up next here on Locked On Rams.
Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, right this very second, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And of course, you can bet on all of your favorite NBA players, all of your favorite NBA teams with all sorts of different options. There are quick bets. There are live same game parlays. There are exclusive props and more. You can do some futures on some MVPs and things like that. I would not pick any Lakers in your MVP rundown. Maybe Anthony Davis, Defensive Player of the Year. There's all sorts of props that you can get in on at FanDuel, but you got to go right now, right? You visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Let me give it to you again. FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON, and shoot your shot. FanDuel, of course, is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
And we are off running here on Locked On Rams. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also a special shout out to our everyday listeners out there watching and listening to every episode. And you can join the Everyday Listeners Club too. Membership is 100% free, and you won't miss a thing about your Los Angeles Rams. It is going to be a jam-packed offseason. We got first-round picks back. We got juicy cap space to spend. We got free agents we're going to be after. So you won't want to miss a thing. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, watch and listen over on the podcast side as well. So yeah, by the way, I use the we thing. I know Travis doesn't like that when I use the we thing to reference my team, but if you think that's weird, you just don't get it. So I got, no, I'm just kidding. But look, we not me, right? It's the Rams thing. Okay.
That's
Demarcus
right.
Robinson is definitely a we not me type of receiver. When you look at this Rams wide receiver room, Travis, you look at it, I mean, the top three are set. We talked about it a few seconds ago. You got Cooper Kupp, you got Puka Nacua, you have Demarcus Robinson, you have Tutu Atwell, who we'll talk about in a little bit coming up next, but he's still on that rookie deal. And then I think, look, this wide receiver class, it's a deep class. You might not have some of the best, first round. I don't know if you saw, Matt Miller only has 16 players he has first round grades on, but still a lot of quality overall. And I think where the Rams could look for a receiver later on in their draft, I think it does make some sense to pick up a guy. So I think that's a route they could go. But like you said in the first time I wanted to touch on it, yeah, they're not going to go out there and get the T. Higgins types, okay?
Right.
Saving the cap space. They didn't break the bank, so I think they're safe on that move.
Yeah, and look, what the Rams have been pretty good at is finding wide receiving talent in the later rounds of the draft. I know Puka's the most recent example of that, but keep in mind, Cooper Kupp was a third-round pick. We've seen them really do a good job with guys that weren't picked in the top 5 or the top 10 or necessarily even inside the first round. Now, I don't think I would take a wide receiver with one of those high picks. Like you mentioned, D-Mac, they actually have a bag full of assets for the first time in a really long time. So maybe if you wanted to move up and go big, that's one particular option that you could do. But I think that, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this. They need help on the offensive line. They need help at edge. They need help in the secondary, specifically at cornerback. And Demarcus Robinson allows them to feel pretty good about their wide receiver room. Like you mentioned, again, we'll talk about Tutu and how he fits into the rest of this moving forward. But I think drafting a wide receiver is probably something that comes, deeper into the draft. Maybe you fish in that free agency pool, maybe in the the Nordstrom rack department as opposed to going to Tiffany necessarily. But the core of what they have, I think, is really solid. So you can be a little bit pickier. Now, you're going to need depth. We know how this league goes, right? Nobody gets through a whole season unscathed, and you don't get to play with your 3 guys in week 1 that you end up with in week 18. That almost never happens. So you're going to need to find some more pieces. But I think you can be a little bit more patient in trying to find those pieces later into the draft and free agency.
For sure. By the way, Nordstrom Rack is my Tiffany, and that's some upscale stuff right there. But yeah, absolutely. And I see people out there, Travis, saying, "Oh, the Rams are not attending the combine." Sean McVay not attending the combine. Oh, guess what? You don't have to go to the Underwear Olympics just to draft a wide receiver. If you find someone you like, they're going to scout him. They're going to get into advanced metrics when it comes to making that decision. And I would be scared of the Rams of the draft this season. I'd be terrified about who the Rams could pick up based on what we saw last year.
Well, look, the Rams have done a good job in the draft. In particular, they've done a good job in the draft outside of the first round and maybe even the second round. They've been probably better second and third day guys than they have been day one guys. But the combine thing, I like that you call it the Underwear Olympics because it's nothing but that. If you have 3-4 years worth of tape playing football, Doesn't that going to tell you a little bit more than a guy running one shuttle run, than a guy doing one set of reps on the bench press? That constant, 40 plus games of football tape might tell you if the guy's a better football player than how big his hands are. You know what I mean? Like I just don't understand it. And all of those things are measurables, right? That, okay, this guy's this tall, he runs this fast. Well, they do know that they print that stuff on the internet the next day, right? You can just go look it all up. You don't have to be there and see it with your own two eyes. If you want to interview somebody, bring them in, talk to them, interview them. You don't need to be there. I've never understood why that bothers people that they don't go. They've never gone under McVay and Snead, really, and that they're just continuing to do what they've done. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the strategy that works for them, and they're clearly having success with it, so I'm not worried about it. But as far as this receiver room next year, I think you look at talent across the board. I will say there are some questions, though. There are some pretty big questions when you look at, can Puka Nacua get back to being that guy? Can Cooper Kupp get back to being that guy? Can Puka Nacua avoid a sophomore slump? Can he continue to take a big step forward? It's going to be very different next season when defenses and coordinators are going to spend all week trying to game plan on how to stop him. Can Demarcus Robinson build on that success? I mean, can Tutu Atwell have a breakout year? So there are some questions for sure, but I mean, it's going to be interesting.
Well, look, I think you're right. I think that, look, you look at it on paper, and Kupp, Puka, and Demarcus Robinson are a great 1, 2, 3. Fine. There's a world that exists where Cooper Kupp never bounces back. Now what? There's a world that exists where if Cooper Kupp is not drawing the lion's share of defensive attention, what does that do for Puka? It's year 2. They're going to be focused on him more than they were in year 1, that there's going to be an adjustment back the other way. So what does that mean for Puka? Now, all of a sudden, your third guy becomes even more important. That's why I think Demarcus Robinson being there was a really good idea. This could go from a position of strength for the Rams, literally, where they have 3 guys that they feel really good about, to hey, we're a little bit short here. If everybody is a little bit less than they were last year, especially Cooper Kupp, now all of a sudden you're looking for a little firepower along the way. The Puka piece, I think, is the most important one. If he can give you a year, maybe not as good as he had in his rookie year, because that's asking an awful lot, but close to it, then I think everything else kind of snaps into place. But if he loses, say, 15 or 20% of his production, that's a big drop-off. It's still a decent year, but that's a big drop-off. Same thing for Cooper Kupp. Now, all of a sudden, more pressure on Kyren Williams, more pressure on a player like Davis Allen, potentially. Maybe they draft a tight end with that top spot. That's another place that I think that they could go along the way. Kyren Williams, you lean on him a little more. Does his body stand up? There's that whole chain reaction of, if your best guys aren't your best guys, is everybody else able to be a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to pour cold water on the wide receiver room and your hopes next season, but health concerns are definitely legitimate when it comes to Puka and Kupp. I mean, Puka early in his career, Kupp now in his career, and it's the biggest cliche in the world as far as, okay, what you need to do to have success, stay healthy. I asked a player, I said, hey, I asked a Dodger player during spring training, I said, hey, outside of health, what do you need to have a successful season? And I guess they listened to me, they said, well, stay healthy. I'm like, come on. I literally said not to say it. You still said it. I hate that, right? But it rings true with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So I believe in these guys. I'm actually pretty bullish on Kupp having a big bounce back season. These two have been working out together, and I think that's a big factor, the chemistry they're building. So I think they have it, but I think this wide receiver room, the biggest question is, can you find that weapon outside of those guys if you need them? And the big question we're going to have to answer again is, can Tutu Atwell find something and find a role? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Rams.
Today's Locked On Rams is sponsored by BetterHelp. So let me ask you a question. What is the first thing you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you exercise, go for a run, go to the gym, take a nap, read a book, maybe go chat with friends? A lot of us spend our time and our days wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, what would you do to use it? Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try? It is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, to be suited to your schedule. It's pretty easy. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So if it just doesn't connect on that first one, you can switch for no additional charge. So learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Let me give it to you again. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday, free and available wherever your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, Travis, here in our third segment, we're going to talk about a player that's been one of the more polarizing players for the Rams the last couple of seasons. That, of course, is wide receiver Tutu Atwell. Now, the first couple of games for Tutu Atwell, it felt like the breakout season was on. And you saw those numbers. Week 1, 8 targets, 6 catches, 119 yards. Week 2, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 77 yards. But after those two games, it just was not the same. He had 26 catches for 287 yards on 50 targets for the rest of the season. Did have a 38-yard touchdown, the wild card game against the Detroit Lions, but he got usurped by Demarcus Robinson for that WR3 spot. It just still feels like he's not going to have a prominent role for these receivers moving forward.
He's a gadget guy that doesn't have a gadget, right? I know he's really fast. Okay, cool. Can you turn that into something that helps your team win? And the answer is so far, no. I think what's interesting, had Tutu Atwell been drafted somewhere other than where he was, which was with the Rams' top pick a few years ago in the second round, a relatively highly drafted player, I think the expectations would be a little bit more realistic. He's just so small, and he's going to have a hard time standing up to the rigors of being a down-in, down-out wide receiver that you were hoping that maybe, best case scenario, he turns into like a Deshaun Jackson type. Well, that obviously hasn't happened. You were hoping that maybe he could turn into some sort of return specialist. That obviously hasn't happened. So what's left for him to do? As a wide receiver 4, as somebody who can come in and maybe, take the proverbial top off the defense occasionally and keep guys honest. Okay. But I think that the hope that he would develop into somebody that would catch 50 passes a year, that would be a threat to do things, it's just not there. It just hasn't happened. The fact that the Rams signed Demarcus Robinson as quickly as they did after the end of the season, I think speaks to where they are with it. Maybe there's an opportunity for him elsewhere. Maybe there's an opportunity for him in a different role here. But, at some point, it's not what you can do. It's what have you done. And so far, he hasn't done a whole heck of a lot. And he needs to start putting some good stuff on some tape pretty quickly, or he's going to have a really hard time getting on that field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I've taken on the role as being the Tutu truther on this podcast. And I've defended him, and I've talked about how they can use him. And I really want to talk about him in the positive light, still on a team-friendly rookie deal. He has speed. He has the ability to take the top off of defenses. That can open up routes for other receivers. He actually has underrated hands. He's made some contested catches. But, look, even if you are on the field and Stafford's not getting you the ball, it really just tells you everything you kind of need to know, right? And question 2 is, can you block? Can you do other things like you mentioned? So there's those things as well. I think that he's someone who might ultimately benefit from a change of scenery because of how the Rams are going to use their receivers. You don't see them going too deep into the depth chart if everyone stays healthy, but he does know the Rams system. If the guy goes down, he can step in there and provide some quality depth. But I think the dreams of him being, like you said, a Deshaun Jackson type, someone that can really be an explosive receiver, I think that ship has sailed. And maybe you talk about the draft pick selection. That's another reason why, because he was drafted so high. But Travis, it makes you wonder, right? Wait a minute. Where did we see this before? Was there another receiver that maybe the Rams had some warning signs that said maybe don't go out and draft another receiver that has the initials TA, right? Maybe they should not draft receivers that have TA as their initials. Of course, I'm talking about Tavon Austin, right?
Yeah, Tavon didn't win. Look, I believe it or not, I think that Tutu was probably better than Tavon Austin simply because he wasn't a first-round draft pick and they didn't give him a second deal. Yeah. Those guys don't really work in this league. There's always just work for Deshaun. Okay, there's one. Like there just aren't enough of those guys that are special enough to do it. I think you brought up something that is pretty important right there. Simply that he does know the Rams system. So if you do need to put him in a pinch, if you do need, somebody goes down and you need to get a game or two or a month or two, and you got a guy that knows it as well as Tutu does, I think that can be useful. But at some point, you got to start making plays, and he just hasn't made enough plays.
And that's really all there is to it. But still, I think that he'll remain with the Rams. I definitely think they'll head into training camp, and there you'll hear a lot of good things about him. And then maybe we'll see if the contract year, kind of the last year in that rookie deal, will kind of spark something. And like I said, with the receiver issues, he could get his opportunity. Maybe he does make the most of them. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And of course, you can follow the People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers, at Travis Rogers. And until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.